Hello everyone. So excited to welcome you to our webinar today. My name is Shirley. I'm with the API Institute on Gender-Based Violence. I'm assuming you guys can all hear me, so I'm just going to plow on. Just want to take a quick moment to say we know that these times are unprecedented ones, and there's a lot on everybody's hearts and minds, to say the least. A lot has changed, and we know that many of you who work in shelters or in direct services with survivors have felt the strain. And so I and the presenters want to thank you for taking the time today to learn about this important issue, which is still affecting many women and girls worldwide. And of course, we also want to say we hope that you and your loved ones are taking care, and thank you for the work that you have done and continue to do for survivors. I just want to do a quick roadmap of the presentation ahead. Sound is clear. Sorry, I'm just looking at the chat, making sure everybody can hear me okay. Just a quick roadmap of the presentation. We're going to be providing a brief overview of FGMC, including what the term means, ways that it's practiced around the world, the impacts it has on survivors. We'll be describing the history of the anti-FGMC movement in the United States, some of the current movements that's going on, and what some of the laws say. We'll then talk about how this issue connects to the broader gender-based violence work and why FGMC is a form of gender violence, and how that connects to domestic violence, sexual assault field as well. We'll then talk about, of course, resources for service providers, and we will be putting some time at the end for questions and answers. Throughout the presentation, we will be showing a few videos from the Voices to End FGMC project, which Maria will tell you a little bit more about. If you are not joined in via computer audio, unfortunately, you won't be able to get any of the audio from these videos, but we will be sharing the links to all of the videos along with all of the rest of the Voices videos so that you can watch them separately. It's a really cool project, elevating the voices of survivors and those impacted by FGMC, so either way, I would encourage you all to watch them anyway. We will be recording this webinar and sending the recording and slides to everybody once they're ready, about a week after today. Throughout the presentations, if you have questions, reactions, comments, feel free to put them in the public chat box, and we will leave some time to respond to them at the end. Like Daniel mentioned, there are some tech issues today, or hopefully we'll be able to provide clear audio throughout, but just bear with us if those tech issues do show up. Quickly introducing the speakers today. Maria has worked in the anti-gender violence field for over a decade in research, policy, program development, and direct service. She is the co-founder and executive director of Sahiyo, which empowers Asian communities to end female genital cutting. And then we have Dr. Ada Khan, who is the network coordinator for the Us and Fgm network, providing technical oversight and day-to-day management for the implementation of the network's activities. The network's goal is to eliminate FGMC by connecting, supporting, elevating, and advocating on behalf of and with diverse United States stakeholders engaged in prevention, education, and care. And as for myself, I'm not going to be doing much speaking, but the Asian Pacific Institute on Gender-Based Violence is helping to organize today's webinar. We are a national resource center that provides technical assistance, training, resources, and other support for advocates and communities working on gender violence issues in Asian Pacific Islander and Native Hawaiian communities. So I'm going to turn it over to Maria.
Thanks so much, Shirley, and welcome everyone to this webinar. Hopefully you can all hear me as well, and apologize for any of the sound issues. We're really so glad you all are joining us, and just a quick note that this next section that I'll be covering is really going to discuss the who, the what, where, and when in terms of FGMC, or female genital mutilation / cutting. And also throughout the webinar, as Shirley mentioned, we will be showing short videos created by survivors to help highlight the nature of FGMC within communities. And these are part of the Voices project, which I will mention a little more detail in just a bit, that we initiated with our partner organization, Story Center, about 3 years ago. So in terms of how we're going to start, we wanted to understand, before we dive into the content, just to get a better understanding of who's on the webinar and what experience folks have with this issue, we wanted to start off with this question. And the question is, how many people know someone who has experienced FGM/C or female genital mutilation/cutting? And you should be able to answer this question by, I believe, raising your hand, or if you could write in the chat box your response to this question, that would be wonderful, and it'll help us gauge, who is on this webinar as well. And we'll give everybody about 1 to 2 minutes to respond to this question here.
So this is Shirley again. If you want to use the hand raise feature, it looks like a little person with his hand up at the top left of the screen. If you click the little drop down arrow next to the person, you can, I guess, raise hand probably would be the best option, or agree.
Thanks, Shirley. Okay, so it looks like we've got quite a mix of responses from some folks who have not come in contact with someone who's undergone it, others who have, including family members, friends, looks like health professionals who have been working with survivors. Quite a few people have raised their hands as well. And it looks like we have some survivors. Thank you for joining us. Okay, great. So it looks like we do have quite a mix of folks in terms of your knowledge and your experience and your background with this issue. Just so everyone knows, we are going to start with just sort of a general understanding of what FGMC is. And because of time restrictions, we won't be able to dive into it as deeply as we would like, but we do want to introduce the topic and go through the agenda, as Shirley mentioned. So thank you again, everyone, for responding. To move forward, just so that everyone is on the same page, we wanted to start with the World Health Organization definition of female genital mutilation/cutting, or FGMC. FGMC comprises all procedures that involve partial or total removal of the external female genitalia or other injury to the female genital organs for non-medical reasons. It is recognized internationally as a human rights violation, torture, and extreme form of violence against women and girls, and it is usually performed between birth and puberty. Throughout this presentation, we will be referring to the practices FGM/C, but it is important to note that there are many different terms for it, and some of these terms are indigenous to the community practicing it. So, for example, it might be referred to as sunna, it might be referred to as katna, and there are various names. One thing just in general to be cognizant of, in particular if you are a frontline professional or service provider, is if you are working within communities, and you might all be aware of this as well if you are already working with communities, it's often helpful to refer to the practice in the same way that the community members you are referring to it are doing, and that's just also helpful in terms of engaging in conversation and dialogue. But for our purposes here, we'll be talking about it as FGMC, or I might refer to it as FGC. Okay, so there are various physical forms of FGMC, and the World Health Organization has categorized these into 4 types. In general, these 4 categories are very broad in themselves, but to give you the definition of the categories, type 1, which you can see the different types on this chart, but type 1 excision is removal of the clitoral hood with or without removal of part of the clitoris. So again, it's a pretty broad range, but it can be from a very minor procedure in terms of what is removed to something that involves removing all of the clitoris. Type 2 is partial or total removal of the clitoris and the labia minora with or without excision of the labia majora. Type 3 involves narrowing of the vaginal orifice with creation of a covering seal by cutting and appositioning the labia minora and or the labia majora with or without excision of the clitoris. And it's also referred to as infibulation. And in general, types 1, 2, 3 range in terms of physical severity, from type 1 being known as some of the least severe forms in terms of physical severity that is being done, to type 3 being the most severe. And then there's a type 4, which usually includes pricking, piercing, cauterizing. It is generally known as the other category. And we go through this just to give an understanding of what FGMC involves. But again, note that these categories are very broad, and there are many different forms that are happening in different communities throughout the world. So with that in mind, we are going to start with Aisha's video. And this is the first video that we'll be showing from the Voices Project. And really, we wanted to show these videos to help. We can give you information about FGMC, but it really helps to actually hear from survivors about the impact, about what it is, and to really get a deeper understanding of what it is. So this project, Voices to End FGMC, is about mobilizing a critical mass of storytellers and activists from across the globe by bringing people together to share and heal from their experiences of female genital mutilation or cutting, to connect, and grow as leaders in their communities, and create short videos that call for an end to this harmful practice. And in this first video that we will watch, Aisha mentions the Sunnah version of FGMC, which in general is considered one of the least severe forms. And we'll be playing it on the screen, but as Shirley had mentioned previously, if you are calling in via phone audio, unfortunately you won't be able to hear the video audio. We will, of course, be sending around the PowerPoint with the links after the webinar, and you can also go to Sahiyo's YouTube channel to find all the videos from the Voices collection. And then also, if Gada or Shirley, you wouldn't mind typing in the URL for the video in the chat box, we can share it with participants that way too. So as the video plays, we do want to just let everyone know, we would love to get your responses and your thoughts, so please feel free to continue typing in your responses on the chat box. And due to time, we won't be able to reflect on each video, but we really welcome comments and continued discussion on the chat box. Okay, and then we would like to play the video, Aisha's video.
When I was 5, my grandma took me to see a lady. They pulled the curtain closed, made me lay down, and then cut me. My dad didn't want it done to me, so my grandma did it when he was out of town. He was mad later, and my 2 younger sisters have not been cut. For years, I made fun of girls who hadn't had it done. We thought we were better than they were. Our whole family moved to the States, and when I was about 12 to 13 years, I overheard my mom and my auntie arguing. My auntie wanted to have her daughter cut, even though she herself had needed to be cut open again to have sex, and then wasn't able to have a vaginal birth. I heard my mom tell my auntie, "You don't need to do it. Look at my 2 daughters. They're fine." I had to confront my mom. Why was she sticking up for my cousin when she hadn't for me? She told me she had felt bad about letting my grandma and my great-grandma take me that day. She said yes, I allowed it, but I made sure it was the sunnah, the least harmful kind. Digging deeper, I learned it's not a religious practice. It's a cultural thing that's passed down. There's nothing in the Quran about it, but aunties and grandmothers do it. If you hadn't had it done, you're considered promiscuous. Men ask you, "Magudan tahay?" If you're not, they get turned off. At least the newer generation is talking more openly about it. I thought it was normal for a long time, but I think differently now. I hope my story will end the woeful ignorance on the issue of FGC.
So please feel free to type in your responses or your thoughts, reflections to that video in the chat box. And we definitely encourage that throughout this webinar and every time that we are able to watch a video too. So that was the first video. In it, you might have noticed that Aisha starts discussing reasons for why FGMC is done in her community, which we will discuss in a bit later on. But I wanted to make note of her mentioning that it is done because of various reasons. Aisha mentions religion and the idea that a girl would be promiscuous if she doesn't have it done. Also, Aisha discusses some of the pain associated with it, including health complications that have happened to relatives of hers who have had it done, which takes us to our next slide. FGMC can have lifelong health consequences that start right after being cut and into all stages of a girl's life, some of which include chronic infections, hemorrhage, severe pain during urination, menstruation, sexual intercourse, and a few other reasons that are listed on the PowerPoint slide. This is by no means an exhaustive list here, so there are many other physical complications that can occur too, but we wanted to give you an idea of some of the complications that can occur. And I also want to mention that not all survivors experience the same complications. It does vary survivor to survivor, and that depends on a host of reasons from the type of cut that's happened and other factors too. Okay, so then that's going to take us to our next video. And to really help highlight some of the physical challenges, we will be next watching Renee's story. So here again, please feel free to comment on the chat box. And let's play Renee's story.
I was born in 1944 to a loving Midwestern American farm family. We were close to the earth and our animals. When I was 3, my mother became concerned that my face turned red when I touched my clitoris. She brought me to a doctor, and the doctor cut me. My mother said, "Don't ever talk about this." I was alone with my questions as a child, teenager, and young adult. I did not discuss nerve damage discomfort, even with my sisters. When I gave birth to my first child, I did not talk about the complications I faced. I wanted a natural labor, but the doctor didn't know what to do. He put me under to perform an extensive episiotomy. I awoke 4 hours after my daughter was born, and it took my body months to heal. I told a couple from my church about what had happened to me as a child. They said, "Don't ever tell that story again." Later, I shared with women at work who said, "Don't repeat that or you'll ruin your career." But is this really my shame? What about other women having their babies with doctors who don't know what to do? I could not stay silent, and I started reaching out to new people. My Somali friend Filsan Ali and I produced a bilingual brochure for infibulated Somali women to give to their doctors to make safe labor and delivery plans. I went public internationally, and my close friends and family supported me. Creating art and connecting with nature has helped me heal. I've learned to spin wool and weave on a loom. I have found peace in flower gardens, weeding, deadheading, and making bouquets. Today I live where eagles soar and deer feed by a river. I hope my story will help people be aware that girls have been cut in cultures throughout the world.
All right, so that was our next video. Please feel free to share your thoughts, reflections in the chat box, and it looks like people already have been doing, but encourage and welcome all of you to continue doing so. So I mentioned that I share this story because for several reasons, one of which is Renee mentioned some of the health complications around childbirth that happened to her as a result of FGMC. Another is that I share Renee's story because for many people who are not familiar with this issue, it becomes a shocker because people don't, there are many misconceptions around who FGMC occurs to. And Renee's story really helps highlight that this is a global issue occurring to women and girls of all different backgrounds, and that here in the United States, actually up until the 1950s, there was a form of FGMC, often referred to as clitoridectomies, that was performed to treat women for what was known as hysteria, to stop masturbation, and stop lesbianism. So in Renee's case, it was to stop her from masturbating, but that was something that is almost a forgotten history in terms of what the history and connection, the United States' history and connection to FGMC from the past. One other note about FGMC that is important to recognize that is there is a growing concern, particularly in countries such as the United States and other countries as well, but that FGMC is becoming medicalized and that it is being performed by health professionals almost as a way to justify it and make it appear safer. And this will be mentioned later on, but there was a doctor charged in 2017 for performing FGMC in the United States. All right, so female genital cutting or mutilation also does affect survival's mental health. And this is an area of research that has only started to be collected in the past few years, really, in terms of recognizing the long-term mental health consequences of FGMC. But some of the mental health consequences can really result in poor sleep, fatigue, generalized body pain, limitations in daily activity, poor self-perceived well-being, altered sexual function. And again, this is not an exhaustive list, but this is just to give you an idea of some of the mental health effects as well. It's really important to recognize, again, that not all survivors are going to experience every single after effect, whether it's physical or mental health, but trauma does manifest differently in the individual and in relation to their circumstances around how they were cut and their reactions to it. And so one reason we are sharing the different videos is to show how it has affected these women differently, although there is a thread connecting them all in the fact that they have experienced it. So with that in mind, we're going to share the next video, which is Tasneem's story, which is called A Sense of Loss. And this next video really does help to emphasize the mental health consequences of FGMC, particularly as Tasneem discusses how she was searching for validation for the pain that she experienced. So if we can play the same story.
When I turned 40, I felt brave enough to seek counselling. It took me a long time to be ready to deal with the grief and trauma of FGM and the guilt I experienced after speaking up about it and exposing my family and culture's dirty secret. Once I began counselling, I wanted to know firsthand what was done to me and if it would explain why I was childless. Up to that point, all the medical professionals I had seen for various reasons over the years had completely ignored my FGM during examinations. This time, I got an appointment with a female FGM specialist. I told her my FGM was done in a medical setting when I was 7 years old. After examining me, the doctor said that what happened to me had nothing to do with whether or not I could get pregnant. Then she said, women's vaginas and clitorises come in different shapes and forms. Every woman's body is different. I can't see any visible scarring. You could have been born this way with no visible clitoris. Looking back now, I think she meant to be kind and put my mind at ease. But her words that meant to offer comfort only caused more suffering. I had wanted a doctor's validation, an acknowledgement that the FGM was real and not something only in my mind. Instead, her failure to listen to what I had told her about being cut and her focus on the lack of physical evidence just emphasized the pain. I'm lucky I was mutilated in a way that left.
All right. So again, feel free to write any reflections or thoughts regarding Sahiyo's video. And again, we wanted to share this video because it really felt like it was important to help explain the mental health consequences that can occur for FGMC, regardless of the type of FGMC that is done to a person. So another area that we wanted to talk about is how FGMC can also impact one's sexuality. In 2017, Sahiyo, which is the organization that I co-founded with 4 other women, conducted a study in which we surveyed 385 women from the Bora community, which is a community that I grew up in, to understand how prevalent FGMC was within the community. We found that it was very prevalent. About 80% of the community experienced it. We also asked the question of if it had affected their sexual life, and we found that 309 women had mentioned that they had undergone FGMC, and 35% believed that it had affected their sexual life, while 32% just weren't sure. And part of that is also just including that there is a general lack of awareness about female anatomy and how things function. Of the 32% who responded that FGMC affected their life, which was about 108 women, 87% said that it affected it negatively. And with that in mind, we're going to show you the next video, which is by Lena. And Lena's video really helps to highlight how she learned that FGMC was done to control her sexuality. And she really does talk more about how it's affected her over her adult life as well.
It's 1980. I am 7 years old on summer vacation in Karachi, Pakistan. One morning, my aunt comes to take me shopping. I'm excited. We head to Sadr and stop at an unfamiliar apartment building. My aunt says, I just have to run an errand. I follow her into a dark entrance up 2 flights of stairs. We pause outside a badly scratched door, and my aunt rings the bell. An elderly woman greets us. She's dressed in a ghagra koti and her head is covered with a dupatta. The apartment is cramped and hot, musty. The woman leads us into a brightly painted room. Suddenly and without any warning, she grabs me and pushes me onto my back. She strips off my panties and spread eagles me with well-practiced efficiency. Before I know what's happening, I feel a sharp, hot pain between my legs. As I cry out, she says triumphantly, "Done." She quickly bundles me into a cloth diaper and brings me to my feet. Only then do I notice a pair of old scissors with blood on them on a tray next to her. I hear my aunt say, "Auntie ne salam karo?" I obey. The whole thing takes less than 15 minutes. I'm filled with shame. My mom had caught me exploring my body a few weeks before. "This is a sin," she'd said. So I believe I have been punished. Over the years, I've wondered, would I have grown up more confident if I'd never been cut? Would I have been better able to appreciate and enjoy my body? Or been more comfortable with sex and intimacy? I will never know. I think back to that salam and my blood boils. I hope my story will break the circle of silence that has allowed genital cutting to continue.
Okay. So again, feel free to make comments. And thank you to Shirley and Gada for sharing resources. And for others I see that are sharing resources too. I think that's wonderful. We can get back to the PowerPoint. Great. Okay, so throughout these videos, you've started to hear some of the different reasons for why FGMC continues in various communities, and you might have picked up on various storytellers were talking about various different reasons. To sum it up, in general, FGMC is considered a social norm within many communities, and that really means that it has been justified in all sorts of ways so that it can continue generation after generation. Some of the reasons we have heard about throughout these stories were that it was done to curb sexual desire, to prevent promiscuous behavior. It was done for religious reasons. It was done for culture. Some other reasons really are connected to the idea that it's a tradition or marriageability, meaning that in some communities that a woman to be eligible for marriage must undergo it. It can also be connected to reasons of cleanliness and purity. And we have, and our study also showed that some women in some communities have heard that it actually increases sexual pleasure. There are many other reasons given, such as the rite of passage for womanhood. It's aesthetically more pleasing, and some misconceptions that the clitoris is dangerous. So again, there are a variety of reasons, and really it is something that's been justified in all sorts of ways in order, it's a social norm so that it is continued generation after generation. And with that, I'm going to show another video from Severina, and she talks a little bit about why it's done in her community and really focuses on the idea of tradition, and that's why she was taught it was done.
I'm a Samburu from Northern Kenya, the last born girl in a polygamous family. When I was 8, I started boarding school with Catholic nuns. My dad was angry with my mom for allowing me to go to school, but she supported me. Just before my 13th birthday, I went back to my village during the Christmas holiday. One morning, I'm a Samburu from Northern Kenya. Kenya, the last born girl in a polygamous family. When I was 8, I started boarding school with Catholic nuns. My dad was angry with my mom for allowing me to go to school, but she supported me. Just before my 13th birthday, I went back to my village during the Christmas holiday. One morning, my mother woke me up and said, "You have to be strong. It is My clothes were removed. Milk was poured over me.
A few seconds. But it's great to see. Okay. Oh, I didn't mean to get out of the video. I had just paused it to see if we could let it play.
I heard a woman say, "Make sure that it's all cut out." Then I passed out. When I woke up, my whole body hurt. I thought about how I'd been naked in front of all those women, and I did not want to see anyone. Why would our ancestors pass this act down to us? I could not accept it. But others do. Women keep it going, and men never asked about what our girls go through. They only say, "This is what is supposed to happen." When I speak out to educate young girls that they can refuse to be cut, many people say, "Why are you crushing our traditions?" But no one has ever convinced me that the pain of female genital mutilation is justified in the name of culture or anything else. If I ever have a daughter, she will never go through what I went through.
I hope my story will inspire other survivors.
You had a chance to hear some of these stories from survivors. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the data on FGMC in terms of figures and numbers. So the current figure is that 200 million girls have undergone or are at risk of undergoing FGMC. And really it's only in the last few years, though, that the United Nations has recognized FGMC as occurring globally. And that's important to recognize in connection with that 200 million figure. So in 2015, the UN implemented the Sustainable Development Goals, which are known as the SDGs. And in goal number 5, intended to help achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls, for the first time called on all countries to collect information on the prevalence of FGMC. Prior to the SDGs implementation, only relevant countries were asked to track this type of data. That meant that FGMC was only measured in the 32 countries in Africa and the Middle East where UNICEF collected the data. Other countries where FGMC was reported, including in the US, had no obligation to track this information. So it resulted in, for decades, millions of women and girls not being encountered because they weren't viewed in these relevant countries. However, again, as I mentioned, it has really been recognized in the last few years that this is a global issue. And it is something that there have been a few reports that have been coming up to really highlight that it is happening in other parts of the world and other communities not previously recognized. A couple of reports that have come out recently include, and hopefully Gada and Shirley could share these links too, but one report that came out found that FGMC is found in at least 92 countries around the world. And this report was carried out by Equality Now, the US and FGMC network, and the End FGM EU network. Another report that came out recently that really highlights FGMC in Asia is a consultation report that was released by Orchid Project and Arrow. And there's a lot of work being done because, unfortunately, a lot of the countries not recognized where FGMC is happening are found within Asia as well. So now getting back to FGMC in the United States. I'm going to share a couple of figures, but then I'm going to turn it over to Gada to really talk about the movement within the United States. So even though we don't have nationally represented data here, the CDC did do some estimates, and a report came out that showed in 2012, over 500,000 women and girls in the United States had FGMC performed on them or were at risk of FGMC. However, again, I do want to mention and reiterate that this data is underrepresented because it takes extrapolations from the CDC study, meaning that many girls have not been included in the data. So what happens is that data was based on methodology that involved looking at high prevalence countries within Africa and the Middle East, where there was nationally represented data, and then looking at immigration patterns here in the US and sort of extrapolating it to determine how many women and girls were at risk or had undergone it, which means that many girls and many of the women in the stories that you've seen were not counted because they didn't come from those countries, or they were born in the United States, or it's been happening in generations after generation here in the US. The CDC has acknowledged these limitations, and they are actually working on better tracking the real number of women and girls affected in the United States too. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Gada to lead us through the next portion.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you everyone for joining us today. It's an honor to be here with you all to talk about this very important issue. Before I start, I just wanted to ask, have any of you heard about the anti-FGMC work here in the US? If you have, please let us know what you've heard on the chat box. I'll give you a minute or two just to gauge your response. All right, it looks like we have mixed responses with quite a few people who have heard about anti-FGMC work here in the US and a lot who haven't, and some who are actually part of the US network and are already familiar with Sahiyo's work. So this is great, and so it's nice to hear that some of you are already involved in the work as well. But let's take a quick dive into what's going on here in the US. As you've all seen from the powerful videos that we've just watched so far, that ending FGMC really requires a comprehensive response that puts the voices of survivors front and center. And for quite a few decades now, actually, there has been a variety of organizations working on this issue in the US. However, over the past 10 years, a loosely affiliated network of survivors and advocates and organizations have emerged with the intention of advancing a comprehensive multi-sectoral approach to FGMC prevention and providing services to those who have been affected, because along with prevention comes the care for survivors. The real aim was to increase that coordination and collaboration among government, frontline workers and professionals and communities to end FGMC. And from that, the US End FGMC network was soft launched in 2016 with the first End FGMC Summit in DC, where a comprehensive recommendations that target these multi-sectoral entities were put forth by the network to continue to bring together organizations here in the US working on this issue. And the network was officially launched in 2018, centering on the voices of survivors and collaboration, while also taking into account the importance of tolerance, diversity, and equity in all of our actions. The US and FGMC network also developed a scoping report or a needs assessment to really understand the US context and build on what's already going on here in the US. And what we found was, in general, there's a broad-based increase in awareness on FGMC issues, and that's due to the increased recognition that FGMC really is situated at the intersection of several related topics, including sexual and reproductive health rights, women's rights and empowerment, gender-based violence, and child rights and child marriage as well. We are also seeing that increased awareness due to the FGMC case that Maria had mentioned, and I will go into detail on it later, but also the increase in state laws that actually give the issue greater visibility. There has also been an increase in government support, and we do recognize that the involvement of government agency representatives has been an important dimension of the work in the US. After the FGMC summit in 2016, the Interagency Working Group on FGM was created. There's also, we do see that the government is the biggest donor to FGMC work here in the US, but also the official recognition among government entities through official legislation and resolutions that FGMC is a form of gender-based violence and a human rights violation is really important. There has been also a great increase in support for research and data collection here in the US. As Maria mentioned, there is no national prevalence study here in the US that addresses FGMC, but we're seeing more and more support for funding for initiatives here in the US, including from the Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Justice, Office of Victim Support, as well as the CDC now is also undergoing a second round of data collection to address FGMC here in the US. There's also more broad agreement and engagement and collaboration, and that's where we see the US and FGMC network playing a role in terms of we now have over 60 member organizations here in the US working on this issue, as well as over 400 individual members working on this issue. But we're also seeing state and citywide coalitions all over the country that are working on this diligently. Survivor-led initiatives, of course, have definitely been front and center. These formidable trailblazers are speaking out in their families, communities, and globally, as you've seen through the videos, and they are owning their stories and sharing them in commanding ways, and this has definitely impacted the movement. And they're doing this through various platforms, such as the digital stories that Sahiyo has been doing. There's also an increased willingness among some communities to acknowledge and speak about the practice. But with this increase in survivor and communities speaking out, we are seeing also some backlash from communities or survivors not getting the support that they need from their communities. And here lies the importance of continuous support for survivors, not only in providing the services and social services that the survivors need, but also in supporting their initiatives. We are also, along with this increased awareness, we unfortunately are seeing an integration of FGMC issues into the anti-immigrant or anti-Muslim agendas, and that is unfortunately been a barrier to the work that's being done by many of our members on the ground, because finding ways to shift social norms away from this practice of FGMC is difficult enough without the added burden of working to avoid further marginalizing communities. And here lies the importance of community engagement and diversity, and looking into the cultural competency issues as well. One barrier that we are facing also within the movement is the limitations of funding, and with the majority of organizations working in this field actually having no funding at all specifically dedicated for FGM. And we're hoping that this changes. Now, with a brief introduction to the overall picture of the FGMC movement here in the US, I'm going to briefly talk about the laws, FGMC laws here in the US, with the recognition that laws are used as a tool to educate communities and also ensure that it is clearly understood that FGMC is not an acceptable practice, and it is subject to criminalization. So in 1996, the United States passed a federal law making FGMC illegal in the country, and so this was quite a while back. Later on in 2013, there was the inclusion of the travel ban added to the law, making it illegal to take girls abroad to be cut, and that is termed generally as vacation cutting. However, it was not until 2017 that we saw the first federal prosecution of on FGMC in Michigan, where and that's with the U.S. versus Nagarwala case, where a U.S. doctor was charged with performing FGMC on 9 7-year-old girls from Michigan, Illinois, and Minnesota at a clinic in Detroit. This case again gained much attention and raised much awareness on FGMC here in the U.S. However, with the advancement of the case, in 2018, a U.S. District Court judge had struck down the federal law based on technical grounds with the proceedings of the case, indicating that Congress didn't have the authority to pass the law in the first place. So because of it had no impact on interstate commerce. Now, this was a big blow because this had nothing to do with the actual recognition that FGMC was a criminal act. It was based on a technicality, but it led to the dismantling of our federal law on FGMC. At the time when the law was struck down, there were 27 states that also had additional laws criminalizing FGMC. And then everyone was really moving forward to try to figure out how we can reinstate the federal law. So many members of Congress wanted to appeal this decision. First of all, DOJ, the Department of Justice, wanted to appeal this judge's decision, but then they decided to withdraw this appeal, and more and more members of Congress decided to intervene and asking the courts for arguing for an appeal for this case. Which is highly unusual in any sense, because this doesn't happen, but it did bring more attention to FGMC here in the U.S. In 2019, however, the federal court denied the House motion to appeal the DOJ's decision not to intervene, and so many of our members, including some of them here on this webinar today, have been advocating relentlessly to introduce amendments to the federal law so that we can once again have a federal law in place. The federal law now is being brought, these amendments to the federal law are now being brought to the floor for a vote, and it's the Stop FGMC Act. But and we're really hoping that this would pass through so that we can have a federal law once again. But throughout this process from 2018 to 2020, so much has been being put forth, and effort has been being put forth from our members to work on these laws. And now we have 38 states that have laws on FGMC. And we're hoping that in the next few years, all states would have laws against FGMC. And this is just a map to show the states that have laws and states that don't. But really, the conversation here is around our members working diligently to ensure that all girls are protected from FGMC. But also, I want to highlight the role of survivors within these efforts, as many of the survivors have been working on instating these laws in the different states, including Kentucky, Washington State, Massachusetts was still being worked on, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and which brings me to our next video of one of our FGMC survivor advocates and steering committee members who's been also working hard on this issue in the US. So if we could play Miriam's video, A Sunny Day in Seattle, please.
It was a lazy, sunny day in Seattle. I was visiting my niece. She was 7 years old, the same age I was when I was cut. I remembered the emerald green carpet, the jumbo-sized Toblerone my aunt gave me as a bribe. She led me to her basement clinic in India. It was just the two of us, and without warning, she laid me on my back, she spread my legs apart, and I blacked out. When it was over, I sat in a corner with the candy bar, feeling sick to my stomach. I saw my aunt sitting with my cousin laughing and pointing at me. When I confronted my parents years later, they were furious. I learned she did this without their consent. Watching my niece reminded me of the me before I was cut. So confident, so self-assured. In that moment, I felt a wave of emotions. Gratitude she would never experience what I went through, and motivation to act. My father told me, the only way to spark change is to speak up. I worried, all of my other identities would be erased. Painter, binge traveler, US diplomat, and proud Texan. When people Google searched my name, would this squeamish acronym be the only thing that would pop up? I eventually allowed my story to be published in The Guardian. It sparked a conversation within my community and even within my own family. My brother was with me that summer, and earlier this year, he launched a campaign to push legislators in Washington state to ban FGM. He wasn't able to protect me from my aunt, but his voice has the potential to break future cycles of violence.
With that, after seeing Mariam's video, I'm going to move it on to Shirley to take it over from here.
Hi everyone, this is Shirley again. I know Maria and Gada have done a great job of going over everything that's on this current slide, but we thought since FGMC is an issue that's fraught with so many misconceptions, it would be a good idea for you all to see some of these myths and misconceptions all together on one slide. So I'm just going to go over this very quickly since, like I said, Maria and Gada have already spoken on most of them, and we only have about 20 minutes left. So as we heard, FGMC is not one standard procedure. It's performed sometimes with a doctor, sometimes without, and many cultural practices are also woven into it. We've heard Maria talk about the 4 different types of it. One of the big misconceptions is FGMC only happens in African communities. It's associated with this religion or this culture or this country. And as we've seen, that's obviously not true. FGMC does happen in the United States, as we've seen. FGM can be safe by being medicalized. That's another one of the big misconceptions. It has lasting impacts, as we have seen, not just to a woman's health, but also her mental health, her sexuality, and her sense of self-worth, self-confidence. Women and girls choose to undergo FGMC. Often that's not the case, as many girls are having this performed without even knowing it's going to happen. FGMC has been criminalized in all the U.S. states. As Gada said, only 38 states have a law against FGMC today, and there's no federal law criminalizing FGMC. And then lastly, FGMC is a religious or cultural issue, and we should not condemn it. Maria's going to speak a little bit more about this in the upcoming slides, but as we have seen, FGMC is it is a complex issue and has lasting trauma on survivors, and should definitely be something that we need to work towards ending. I'm going to turn it over to Maria for the next section.
Great. Thank you, Shirley. All right. I've just been seeing all of the messages in the chat box. Thank you, everybody, for sharing all the researches that you're doing. I think that's really wonderful. But going to our next section, recognizing that we are running out of time, we really did want to have some time to connect it to the broader gender-based violence work, particularly acknowledging that we do have folks on this webinar who are part of different parts of gender violence work, from sexual assault to domestic violence. And I think it's often helpful to think about how FGMC is a part of gender-based violence and the connection to other forms of GBV or gender-based violence as well. So we wanted to start this part just really with another question. And again, you can answer by, actually, you can't really raise your hand to answer this question, but if you can type in the chat box, what connections do you see between FGMC and other forms of gender-based violence? including domestic violence and sexual assaults. Thinking about the videos you've seen, the stories you've seen, what are some of the similarities that you might see between different forms? So if people could type their responses in the chat box, that would be great. Okay, controlling a woman's body and her choices in life. Definitely. Lack of consent. Yes. I'm just going to read out some of the answers that people are sharing. And Shirley and Gada, if you see an answer, please feel free to. Power and control, violation of human rights. I think that shame connects all forms of gender-based violence, which promotes silence about these issues. The normalization of violence. As a domestic violence prevention educator, it's important to see how domestic violence does not happen between men and women, and how not just happen between men and women, how women can hurt other women. Intimidation, emotional abuse, and making the victim feel bad about it. PTSD. Okay. So I know we had to restart the chat box, asserting control. I'm seeing a lot of good comments and connections, which is great. One thing I wanted to, and please continue to type your responses, I just wanted to also make some connections to is how, like some other forms of gender-based violence, we know, for instance, domestic violence is oftentimes learned behavior, particularly for children who are growing up witnessing domestic violence in the home. And this is, FGMC is another form of learned behavior, particularly when you see that it is happening within families, generation after generation too. And oftentimes when you are taught that something is normalized, as Aisha had mentioned in her first video, she didn't think anything of it until others started questioning it. And that is something, again, to recognize that it is a form of learned behavior. Intergenerational trauma, yes, this is definitely another form of intergenerational family violence too, which is a dynamic that we see in other forms of GBV as well. A couple of other things I wanted to mention again is there can be one thing that many survivors face in undergoing FGMC, particularly if they grow up in communities where you're taught you're not supposed to talk about this. Silence is part of what perpetuates this from continuing generation after generation. And I think that silence also we've seen helps isolate survivors from seeking out support. And I used to work in domestic violence as well. I don't know if I actually mentioned that, but for a very long time, and I know that a sense of isolation is something that is very common for domestic violence survivors, particularly in trying to reach out for support. And breaking that sense of isolation can be a very important step. All right, looks like there's a lot of great things here. Because of time, I'm going to actually go to our final video that I wanted to show you, and it just really highlights that intergenerational trauma point and the fact that this is another form of generational family violence too. So this is Saza's story that we're going to be watching as our last video for this webinar. And we'll include the link in the chat too.
Saya berdiri di tepi jalan, memakai pakaian ringkas, kemeja T dan seluar jeans, menunggu ayah menjemput saya dari universiti. Kami sedang menuju ke rumah ibu saudara untuk acara ulang tahun sepupu saya Anissa yang berumur 2 tahun. Assalamualaikum. saya ucapkan semasa memasuki kereta. Ibu bapa dan kakak saya membalas, "Waalaikumsalam." 20 minit kemudian, kami tiba di rumah ibu saudara. Dan terus terbau aroma masakan rendang, lodeh dan sambal goreng yang enak. Rumahnya penuh berwarna-warni. Daripada baju kurung merah dan biru kepada jubah hijau dan juga abaya hitam. Saya mengambil makanan untuk ibu dan diri saya. Dan kami duduk sambil menikmati makanan lazat. Makcik saya membawa sepupu saya yang comel dan dengan bangganya berkata, "Dia disunatkan minggu lepas." Mata saya terbeliak. Tulang belakang saya menjadi lurus. Saya hampir terjatuh dari sofa. "Dia disunat? Anak perempuan disunat?" saya bertanya. Saya tidak boleh percaya jawapannya. "Ya, minggu lalu oleh seorang doktor. Cepat sekali." "Snip, dah habis pun," makcik saya menjawab. Tetapi ini melanggar hak kemanusiaannya. Ini salah," saya menjerit. Kakak saya memotong perbualan kami. Dia berkata, "Kamu juga disunat semasa kamu kecil." Mulut saya digantung terbuka. Itulah saatnya saya sedar tentang sunat perempuan dan saya mendapat tahu ia telah berlaku kepada diri saya. Tetapi, mengapa? Untuk apa? Saya menanya ibu. Ibu menjawab, dalam Islam, perempuan patut disunat. Cara ini lebih bersih. Dan kamu tidak akan berzina. Pada saat itulah, saya memutuskan untuk mencabar mitos-mitos sebegini dan melindungi anak-anak perempuan lain di Singapura. Dan sejak itu, saya telah berkempen untuk menghentikan amalan sunat perempuan.
Share some resources with all of you.
Sorry, I think I got cut off for a second there. Can everyone hear me?
There. Yes.
All right. Sorry about that. I know we're running out of time, but I think the question on everyone's mind is the intersection between FGM and COVID-19. And as Maria and Shirley mentioned, there's definitely that intersection. We know the connection between gender-based violence and FGM. And now we're seeing also this being playing out with COVID-19. And while there is a need to gather clear evidence on what's really happening on the ground, we can definitely use lessons learned from Ebola outbreaks and how different public health crises have also impacted the FGM movement. And I'm just going to quickly point out to a source that UNICEF actually put out just a few days ago on the FGMC and COVID-19 and how the different elements, just as we're seeing an increase in gender-based violence across the globe, there are issues that can come to play when it comes to FGM, including the social isolation factors and the loss of access to education and services and protection services and the loss of livelihoods. But there are also opportunities to disrupt the occurrence or the practice and putting out public declarations decreasing the incidence of this, and also creating new platforms for education. And so I will go ahead and share this resource with you so that you can take a look at it in more detail. But the importance, again, is really when having these plans in place for response plans for emergencies such as COVID-19 needs to actually include and be grounded in gender analysis and really understanding the increased risks of gender-based violence in these situations. And also making sure that there are clear efforts to address things like FGMC or child marriage or any harmful practices at this time clearly within conversations around gender-based violence, but also support access to different tools such as this one to increase education and raise awareness and support survivors and prevent this from happening on the ground. But again, the resources there, I encourage you all to take a look at it. And if you do have any resources also, please do share with us. But we are hearing from our members on the ground who are being directly impacted within their work with the current COVID-19 crisis. Also, when it comes to resources, I know everyone is wondering where can we go to find more information. I encourage you all to visit the US and FGMC network website. We have for a list of resources that are catered to specific topics. But in terms of understanding what are the services that are available here in the US for survivors, right now there's growing services around providing survivor support and mental health supports for survivors, survivor support working groups, also trainings for healthcare providers to better understand how they can integrate mental health support within the care for survivors, but also really understanding the clinical care aspects of FGM. And more organizations and within our membership are putting forward great resources. The slide that you see here just is a small list, very, very short list of what is really out there. And we encourage you to really look into these resources if you are looking to understand a particular issue or a particular area of health. And please do check out these different resources online for you that are going to be available. And now I am going to move it on to Shirley.
So it looks like we don't have much time for questions and answers, but if you have any questions remaining, you can see our contact information here, and feel free to get in touch with the presenters or myself if you have any questions or comments or resources to share. We will be, like I said, sharing all the links that you've seen today, along with all the videos to the Voices stories. There are many more Voices stories that we did not show today, so I would encourage everybody to watch those as well. I don't know if you had any last comments, Maria or Gada, but I just want to say thank you again for joining us today.
Yeah, this is Maria. I just want to echo what Shirley said, and thank you all for joining us. And yes, there are many more stories from the Voices Project, and we are continuing that project, and so we will be collecting more stories. We really, again, one thing I didn't reiterate about the Voices Project is all of the people involved in the project, all of the women, all of the survivor stories, they actually put together their own stories, and really it's an idea of giving them agency so that they get to create the story, the script, really get to focus in on what it is they want to share. And so that's part of the kind of beauty of that particular project. But thank you all again, and thank you for sharing so many resources you have in the chat box.
Yes, thank you guys for all these wonderful resources, and we're going to also be, I'll see which ones we don't have already and add them to our website. So thank you so much for attending, and thank you for listening and joining us. And please do follow us and become part of the network if you're interested in continuing this work.
Thank you all.